My name is Troels. Welcome to yet another episode in Soundpaint. This one here is near and dear to me. We're dealing with percussion. I started working with a computer as a music instrument when I was 5 years old. And the first thing I ever did was to program percussion because more or less only had like drum sequences back then. Years ago, Colin and I recorded the biggest symphony orchestra ever done. And a part of that was to do a 20-piece percussion ensemble. In ATO, we call it Majestica or Majestica Pro. But in Soundpaint, we were like, this is just majestic. So this is the Majestic Percussion ensemble. We also have a brass ensemble. We also have a string ensemble and other unusual sort of super-powered sound designs coming as well in the Majestic Series here. But we're kicking it off with percussion. Now, there's one thing in Soundpaint that I keep coming back to, which is probably my favorite feature of all features inside of the engine. And that is that every single key has 127 velocity layers on a MIDI 1.0 controller. For any of you guys that have a MIDI 2.0 controller, you actually have 66,000 different velocity layers. The samples are generated in real time. I say that because I just want to play you something right now. And then after I played it, let's talk a little bit about what it actually is. This is a little snare drum ensemble played with a timpani ensemble as well. But what's so cool is, if you look here at the UI, is that I'm using one note stretch, meaning that I just isolated one single note from each of the two parts. I tuned the snare so the snare is in tune with the timpani, but Soundpaint doesn't just give you 127 velocity layers, it also gives you on every single key. So with one note stretch, you get the benefit of playing these 127 layers, but on all the different keys. So you can go like Mission Impossible. I love that ring out of the timpani, wow, wow, wow. But because it's tonal, you can also use it this way. It's one single key. And it's fun in the arpeggiator too. I don't know, is this Soundpaint? Is this sound play? I don't know what we call it. For me, it's just like, I feel home. I feel like I'm just jammed with the whole ensemble right at my fingertips. And let's just get the boring, mundane stuff out of the way. If you look here in the parts browser, you'll notice an enormous amount of different arts. These are all heavy multi-sample arts that combined represents all the sort of most common percussion instruments in the family. We have Anvil ensembles, we have simple ensembles, we have beautiful big Gran Casa ensembles. I love that sound. We have large gongs, small snares, large snares. We have these master patches where every single instrument is laid over the entire keyboard here, so you're really the pilot of the whole percussive orchestra. We have simple scratches, we have Piatti cymbals, we have tams and tambourines and anything in between. This is a massive, super-powered ensemble. As I mentioned in the beginning, there's over 20 percussion players in some of these ensembles. So the sound here is just enormously big, and this library is designed for big music. Oh, and one last thing you're going to notice here in the browser as well is that we have Decca, mixed, and wide microphone for every single percussion ensemble. But that's the boring stuff. Let me take you out here in the program menu. Let me just play you another patch. This one was made with tom-tom ensembles, and keep in mind the tom-toms are also stretched across the entire keyboard, 127 velocity layers, and then a tambourine ensemble as well. And when I made this program, I imagined like this big, beautiful, mysterious woman sort of dancing her way through a big crowd of people. Imagine like the most beautiful, exotic dancer you've ever seen in your life, way, way back, maybe like 500 years ago in some ancient Middle East. And it's just to show you you can combine all these different ensembles together. So with this one here, I just started by having like a little bit of a tom-tom ensemble, only using the Deca tree. And then when I move the mod wheel, I'll gradually be fading in both a tambourine ensemble and another pair of tom-toms as well. Tom-tom ensembles, that is. I tuned this one a couple of notes up, and it just gives this super like... And even if we kill the tambourines, we still have two tom-tom ensembles side by side. One of the more unusual aspects in the library is our anvil ensemble. For me, I always just think of an ironsmith when I think of an anvil, or there's these guys that actually blows them like up in the air to see how far they can go. They are not exactly orchestral anvils, but sort of the same thing.
Got 1 pound of powder in there right at it. Got a decent seal.
Oh no! That's the way to do it!
Holy smokes, Batman!
But in the case of Majestic, we have an anvil freaking ensemble, so a bunch of blacksmiths just doing their thing. That also means that the hammer doesn't always hit the metal exactly at the same time. You can sort of hear like it's a little bit of sort of cling-clongy, but in Soundpaint we can mess it up a little bit more, or actually clean it up. If you open our offset module here, you'll notice that I'm using the detail here on part 1. That means that I'm going a little bit into the blacksmith sort of hitting and getting a more stiff sound, because I don't have that sort of initial all the players playing at the same time. I'm going a little bit into the waveform called offset, and now I have this very clean sound. It's just like just raining anvils. Almost sounds like tubular bells. Oh my god, do you guys remember like the intro from Total Recall by Jerry Goldsmith? But there's something about an ensemble of anvils. If you really want to have a percussive attack unlike any other, either download our Clang Soundpaint library, which is all about embracing the anvil, or get them from here as well. Very, very accentuated, sort of metallic, a bang kind of sound. It sits in a very unique part of the mix, and you're just gonna get that like super hit. Also took the anvils here and made sort of a, I don't know, this reminded me a little bit about some sort of ancient dojo. The way the percussion ensembles are divided in Majestic is that you get 3 different types of ensembles. You get your multi-samples, all the hits that we've been listening to, but you also get rolls and swells in addition. So you have all the sort of necessary controls. You can play rolls in Soundpaint because of the velocity layers and the auto-generated round robin, but we have the naturally recorded ones as well, and in quite abundance. It's a little bit boring just to play swells and rolls, but let me just play a few here. You'll notice that I'm controlling the amount of roll on the mod wheel here. I'm morphing between different rolling percussion layers. And it actually allows you to play your own rolls. So if you just want to go like forever, you can do that. But if you want a little more like, you can control it on the keyboard as well. And those are recorded rolls. We also have swells if you want to do the same thing. If you notice down here in the DAW, you'll notice that we have both rolls and swells. The swells obviously played that way by the player, so you really get the natural dynamic. So there's 3 different ways of playing all these percussion instruments. You can make it swell by using the multi-samples to 127 layers. You can use our rolls and the morph shading we have on the mod wheel. Or you can go down here in the browser and just select one of the natural swells. So beautiful. And there is something about human performance sometimes. And then we got some sweet Gran Casa love. Casa ensemble, I think, is one of the most delicious things if you like big bottom percussion. And because we can play with many keys, I don't know how many Gran Casas this would be, but like, I don't know, 50? With an enormous amount of tightness. This is where the computer can shine. This is where we can do things we can't do in reality. If you get 50 Gran Casas, ask them to hit at the same time, it's probably not going to work out that great. But in the computer, and you know, even though we talk about big and percussion being big and these mega ensembles, the biggest ever sampled, it can still be soft and sort of beautiful. (127 velocity layers), and you can also play it all the way up here. So this is like a Gran Casa ensemble 2 octaves up. Almost like a tom. That boom, kind of like the pitch, that's actually the pitch of the Gran Casa, we just can't hear down here. But up here. And you know, midden style, play them like you're a penguin. These are Gran Casas swells, they're just beautiful. Soft and thunderous. And you'll notice on every single key there are different samples, so this might be one type of swell. This might be another one. So they have different lengths, and depending on what length you need, you'll find them gradually on the keyboard here as well. And of course, the mandatory percussion ensemble. In this case here, I mixed a little bit of a snare ensemble on the mod wheel here. So in the beginning, it's just the toms. What a cool, like even just like the way the whole sound decays. Like the biggest hall in the world, you just had like 300 people just playing all their instruments at the same time. Imagine how many players this is. We also have these massive snare ensembles. And try to listen to the difference here. I like to think about microphones not just as something we sort of use in mixing, but also something we can use in the music. So if I take this deep ensemble, this is natural pitch. But I go up an octave here, I'm gonna get a very tight snare ensembles out of the same material. But notice what happens when I move the mod wheel here and I dial in that second wide microphone. We're a little bit further back and wider in the hole. So I think when we work with epic music and all that, we can start incorporating microphones as instruments as well. Something entirely different happens, and I think like we can use the microphones dynamically in our music as well. We also got what we call main programs in the library. This is one example of them. This is just sort of the traditional samples, not being super manipulated or anything, really just more in their raw state. In this case here, it's our simple hits patch. And you'll notice down here on the keyboard that the symbols are different based on what keys I play, beginning here with the Piatti cymbals. I love this one here. These are also velocity based. So even when you take a cymbal, let's take it up here and see what happens. Because we have all the velocities, when you do any kind of rolls with 127 velocity layers and infinite round robin, you can pretty much do rolling, swelling just with multi-samples as well. That's why I said earlier on, it's a little bit unique in the library that we have both this kind of technology and the rolls with morph shading and additional swells. You can really do whatever you want. But I love this sort of feeling of going outside the natural range. It just gives the instrument a little more range that the natural acoustic instrument doesn't have. We also got these main master programs where all the ensembles are laid out over all the keys here. So we begin down in the deep dark bottom here. with Gran Casas. Then you get toms. Then we get into the sort of timpani range. And then into snares and anvils and tambourines. And cymbals, it just continues up the keys here. And then at the very top here, we got stuff like sticks and claps, really more high-pitched stuff. One of the dangers of creating an audio technology partially for yourself, because that's sort of what Soundpaint is for me at least, is that you can do whatever you want to do. We can build an engine for the instruments rather than the instruments for an engine, if that makes any sense. In this case here, forgive me, I'm just like the 5-year kid back in a supersonic sound store, being able to do whatever I want to do. Let me take a timpani ensemble and a snare ensemble and a Gran Casa ensemble and a, I don't know, tom-tom ensemble. Throw the whole thing together and see what happens. Let me just put that on the arpeggiator to start with. Like about 80, 90 people playing at the same time, but very, very tightly. I just say this because you guys should throw the paint around the engine, have fun. There's so many different parts, so much percussion goodness here. You can make so many unique colors when you blend your own palette inside of Soundpaint, hence the name. And just have fun in the keys. All the percussion ensembles in the library, every single one, comes in these main patches as well, where all 3 microphones are loaded. So in this example here, you'll notice I have the Deca loaded here, but we also got the mixed and the wide. So if I want to add any of those, just click here, and now I have 2 microphones and I can use them any way I want. And as I mentioned earlier on, let's try to use the microphones dynamically in the music as well. I just think it's so neat to have such a sort of close control over the mics. For example, let's say I want to dial in the wide microphone here. I just take the volume here, I click MIDI CC, I move my mod wheel, and now I can control the volume of this microphone here. There's a big difference as we sort of go into the room and become bigger. You probably heard me ramble about sample gold in a couple of different videos. For me, the term sample gold are sounds and samples I keep coming back to because they just hit me in the right way. They're in my musical baggage for longer than sort of standard samples, and some of them I just keep coming back to. This one is my favorite patch in the library and my favorite ensemble. This is the Timpani ensemble, and I say that because timpanis are pretty hard to do and to sample, and I don't think there's that many of them that really nails that sort of superpower you want out of your timpanis sometimes. They can be a little bit sort of mellow. But because we had so many players and the whole sort of session was about really emotional energy, we have a pretty good timpani ensemble in here. They have a sweet, sensitive side to them. But the second you start hitting the keys a little bit harder, you really get punch and oomph in them. We also took the timpanis and had them tuned so low that the instrument became more non-tonal. You'll find that in the bottom of the keyboard. It's not really a pitch, but it really has that. You combine that with a couple more here, both tonal and non-tonal. That's sort of what I mean when we talk about really big percussion. But I love that it's so dynamic and expressive. Again, 127 layers here. We also have dedicated programs for hits and rolls in the library. For example, here with the timpani, naturally you want to move your mod wheel up to get the roll, but it's really just a combination of a true hit and a true roll. For example, if we look here in the DAW and I start the ARP here. It's starting to roll a little more. Now, because we have 127 velocity layers, I can sort of sculpt these rolls any way I want. Check out here in the ARP. I'll just try to move it around here as it keeps rolling. That's what I mean. We can roll with the hits, we can roll with the swells, or we can roll with the rolls. It's really up to you what you want to do. I also thought it could be interesting to go inside the DAW and just write a little percussion track with the Majestic Percussion just to see what it sounds like when I put all the ensembles together. You know, we have these super-sized ensembles, but how awesome that we can just throw them together and paint with them. So let's get inside of the DAW. So the track begins with this sort of cool sounding timpani snare. And one of the beautiful things, and that goes when we talk about being outside the natural realm of sound, is that a snare is commonly not known as a tonal instrument, but in Soundpaint it is. That's a snare drum, but it's tonal and it's playable across the whole keyboard with all the layers. Now, if I take the timpani and put it in the same key, we have a tonal snare and a tonal timpani, and I can add a Gran Casa to that as well, and all of a sudden I have this awesome sort of tonal ensemble. And because we have octaves way below the natural range of the instrument, infinitely going down and up on your keyboard, you can get these deep sort of subwoofers out of these sort of unique combinations. Let me take the snare out here and listen what's below it. Isn't that beautiful? So that's a deep Gran Casa, 2 octaves below its normal range, and a timpani doing the same thing. And the Gran Casa is also tonal. It's one of those instruments you would imagine, okay, that's a deep bass drum, right? It doesn't have a note in it, but you go up the keyboard, and then there's the TIE Fighter again. Sorry, I keep coming back to this one. It's just because it was my favorite program when I made the programs, and I just love this sort of abstraction. Taking a tam-tam ensemble, or tam-tam, I actually don't know what they're called, and just boosting it up a couple of octaves on the keyboard, and all of a sudden have this beautiful sort of bell-like gamelan. I just sort of see Kung Fu fighting when I hear this sound here, and I just think it's so sweet. And below this Kung Fu Thai kind of gong, we find a beautiful red 522. Really one of my favorite drum machines, and a sort of modern interpretation of the 808. This is ultra deep sampling. Just check how alive it sounds. You can hear all the natural variations in that analog hi-hat, and I think it's so good because the way it pierces the mix, it offers more like a spiky, porcupine-like mix on top of it. I often think of mixes in shapes. I want to be able to see all the shapes in the mix. This hi-hat here just lies in its own frequency domain. But there's also a couple of other unusual percussion ensembles inside of this demo here. This one particular is a tom-tom ensemble and a timpani ensemble playing together, a most unusual but very powerful combination. so deep and punchy, like down here. You can hear that super low timpani underneath it. Now, as I mentioned, we also have swells and rolls in the library for all the major ensembles. Here are the tam sort of swells. I like to use these for sort of transitional effects. And depending on where I click on the keyboard, I get different kind of swells, from very short ones to longer, sort of more bright ones, and more deep, long ones. Anything you need. And you can use our rack time module here as well if you want to control the length of them as well. They're really, really cool. I love the scratches in particular. Now, there's a very distinct rhythm in this piece here, and I just wanted to add a little bit of tonal passage, a little bit of like spice to it by using our G brass, which both provides analog synths in the very bottom, but also more brighter horn, extreme horn ensembles on top of the whole thing. So right now we have about 5 different massive supersized percussion ensembles played with brass supersized ensembles as well. By combining all these supersized percussion and brass ensembles, we can now bend reality and make it into something entirely new. And for me, this is a little bit what Soundpaint is about, for me at least. Try to listen to this G brass here just isolated. If you ever need really modern film scoring brass stabs, we're not talking about legato, but just those very accentuated percussive like super hits, G brass is really the library to go with, and it blends so well with traditional orchestral libraries, but it's just so much more because it's analog brass combined with natural brass ensembles and then hybrid in between as well. So it's a nice big chunky sandwich of goodness. This is it. This is just what happens when you combine different ensembles and have fun with them and just freely paint with the sounds and think about things like snares that are non-tonal becoming tonal, or combining different elements. And as I, forgive me, ramble in all these videos about, once you have all these sonic ingredients of a high quality, one of the best drum machines ever made, the most extravagant percussion ensembles ever recorded, and it's just freeing on the keyboards and freeing for the mind and sort of freely thinking about composition in a new way. I should also mention, I don't have any formal music education, so when you see me work here, I don't use my intellect at all. I sort of just put sounds together and see what happens. So that sort of TIE fighter sound in the beginning sort of was just me saying like, okay, cymbals, let me just hear what you're outside your natural playing range. Oh, up here, you sound like some kind of cool gamelan kind of style. I start playing you, I get my 127 layers. I know I keep saying 127 too many times, but it makes such a big difference. And I can just play this new instrument now. That inspires me, and then you just add some other ensembles and some G-brass and a drum machine, and that's it. No mystery here at all. I just love doing this whole tempo thing here. I need to do this some more. One note on that. I really try to take pride in not being preachy in videos at all. But I have to say, one thing about the DAW that I keep coming back to is concluding that it's on the grid. If you look here in the DAW, we're full of grids all over. And granted, music is on the grid for the most part, somewhat. But I think the DAW unfortunately dictates a more grid-based music form. If you look at a real orchestra or real band, no one is playing on the grid. Everyone is a little bit off. That's the beautiful thing about live music and performance. It has to be a little bit off. So why the DAW is so stringently strict and lined and square and grid-like is a little bit of a mystery to me at this point, because we've sort of gone through that. And I love the grid. It's great for dance. It's great for anything where you need tightness, and even for stuff like this as well. I love working on the grid. but I think it's a lot about learning to massage our ways out of it so we don't have this completely strict kind of stiff thing, but we have something that's a little bit alive. I stutter, I have an accent, I'm imperfect. All beautiful music really has a level of imperfection in it. So the grid has done beautiful things for music, but it also keeps us a little bit like stiff sometimes when we don't need to be. So that was a little bite from inside the DAW. As you can see, there's a lot in this library here. I mean, we could do a whole separate video just about the parts here. There's too many to talk about, too much to show. We just have a shit ton of awesome ensembles and we can just have fun with them on the keys here. But I want to draw your attention just to one last little experiment if you don't mind. I took a tom-tom ensemble and a timpani ensemble and combined them together just because I could, right? And I encourage you guys, when you have fun with this library here, mangle and put the ensembles together, have fun. This is Soundpaint. We're supposed to throw shit in the walls and see what happens. Snares.